Personally, I should prefer to see the Aborigines.
And the Indians, too. And the Indians, too.
This should be most enlightening.
What makes the red man red?
Teach 'em all about Red Man.
What made the red man red? What made the red man red? What made the red man red? What made the red man red?
Teach 'em all about Red Man. Red Man.
Hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have the Dallas Goldtooth Hopi lookalike joining us from Window Rock.
Are we
This
recording?
year's winner, 2019, or last year's winner.
Last year's winner.
We have to do a virtual pageant this year.
to be safe and social distance in lieu of Gathering of Nations.
Yeah, in lieu of Gathering of Nations. Normally we're main stage at 49 for the lookalike contest. So we're going to have a real electric 49 having a virtual contest.
And we have Tiba Hut joining us from the Berkey. She's a North brother.
What up?
I was trying to find that on the soundboard.
Brother. Just your local Pueblo ratty baddie. What up?
Res Bunny 420.
Res Bunny 420 in the house.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about on this show. There's been a lot of actions here in New Mexico and also around the nation. But Red Nation has been involved fairly consistently locally here in Albuquerque, but also in Gallup. But, you know, I think the thing that is like kind of sticking out in all of our minds is this growing armed white supremacist movement here in New Mexico that is funded by the Freedom Foundation and is enacted by the Chuds on the New Mexico Civil Guard Facebook group. Some of whom we've come to find out are actual neo-Nazis
And neo-Confederates.
Who not only LARP, live action role play, as militiamen, but they also live action role play as Confederate soldiers, taking pictures of themselves in gray uniforms and fatigues, as well as Confederate flags. One of the homeboys, I can't remember his name, so maybe Justine or
Bryce Provence, but he has two fake names in
Right.
between there, so it has four. He has like four names.
Bryce Provence.
Bryce
is a
Leroy Spangler Provence.
Spangler.
Star Spangler Banner.
Spangler.
But
That's like four first names.
gonna name my firstborn Spangler.
Spangler. But he is from, he has a long rap sheet of domestic violence. He's a woman beater. He's also a neo-Nazi, and he has a swastika tattooed on his shoulder. But he was the former leader who conveniently resigned after he was outed by locals for being a fash. But now he is one of the top commenters on the New Mexico Civil Guard page. So our special fash award goes to Bryce Provenance or whatever. I don't even know how to say his name.
Albuquerque, or on Twitter at ABQ161, they did a really good job of doxing this dude. And they have like a massive thread on this dude, Bryce Leroy Spangler. Who's like their I don't know what the hell you call him, chaplain leader or whatever the hell, but it's an incredible thread. Like, I love it. They have all these photos of him being a ridiculous chud, and but the captioning is the best part. They're like, you see, when Bryce Leroy Spangler Province isn't out playing G.I. Joe in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, he likes to spend his time LARPing as a Confederate soldier. Hell, Bryce wrote the book on Confederate LARPing in the Southwest. No, I mean literally. He literally wrote a book on it.
There's a book. We'll provide links in the show notes to all of this.
And then, but then the picture of the book is just a picture of this Bryce dude pointing a gun at a T-Rex in front of the history or some museum. These are your soldiers, white America. Great job.
T-Rex.
The master race.
Oh God.
So I guess that's some kind of like message about how we are not really indigenous to this land, but it was actually dinosaurs.
T-Rex, the original Red Scare.
Yeah,
the original Antifa.
Yeah, T-Rex, the
Oh my
original
God.
Antifa. But
Our
in all
secret-
seriousness,
Yeah, the Antifa Jurassic Park that were secretly breeding Antifa super soldier dinosaurs.
we've gotten out of the park. We're off the reservation.
We're off the reservation.
T-Rex is off the
You
reservation.
know those T-Rexes lost the war because of their short arms.
Their pre-existing conditions and their lack of immunity to
New Mexico Civil Guard's been posting all of these videos on their public page. They have some private pages now that they've since started after we called them out in the media, where they're probably trashing people and just being the racists that they are. But I bet you they watch Jurassic Park as part of their training for their militia activities. What happens when they get out of the park?
So in all seriousness though, like this came to our attention at a Black Lives Matter protest that was hosted by Black leaders and Black organizers in this city in Albuquerque a couple of Mondays ago. Actually, I think it was June 6th, was it?
June 1st.
June 1st, sorry. It was June 1st. And it was probably one of the largest marches that happened in the city. It was pouring rain the entire time, but there was a strong, showing of people from the community. However, during the march, there was a large contingent of Red Nation people, obviously Indigenous. We had an AIM flag flying, and just lots of young Indigenous people, probably about 50 in our block of Native
And like
communities.
primarily queer and femme.
Yeah,
like that is the majority of the Red Nation.
Yeah, that's true. But we were visible, and at the very beginning of the march, we started at the UNM bookstore, which is off of Central. There was an individual, a white guy, who pulled a shotgun actually at the bookstore, and this is important to remember because if you don't know, the University of New Mexico campus has a firearms ban, which is actually illegal to carry firearms. But this individual, was escorted. No arrests were made, even though there was plenty of cops that had witnessed this. There was actually the state police who put up sniper nests on top of the parking garage. Students weren't even allowed to park on campus. They closed the entire campus down. And as we were walking, though, there were obvious, like, white guys who were militiamen who were armed. They were carrying bags, duffel bags of rifles. You could tell that they had body armor and underneath. And Kevlar underneath their sweaters and their shirts, and also they were standing away from the crowd, and they were pointing at us, and they were following us specifically, and just keeping an eye on us like we were being hunted. And they were talking to the police. They were also cruising around in white vans that we saw, and of course, at this point in time, we had no sort of intelligence or knowledge about who these groups were. Come to find out, there's at least 4 different white fascist militias operating and policing, working hand in hand, actually saying prayers with the cops. They had lit a prayer circle.
Yeah, KUNM recorded a video of them doing a prayer circle prior to
with the police officers. And then also the JW Jim and John Jones, who is an MMA fighter.
What does JW stand for?
I can't remember. Jackson Wink.
Jackson Wink Jim.
Jackson Wink Jim.
I don't know if that might just be a place here in Albuquerque.
But it's where they train a lot of cops and militia people. You can go through their Facebook and social media accounts, and that's how I actually found out that a lot of these people, were getting training there. But also, the Jackson Wing Gym showed up armed as well, and infiltrated the crowd towards the end of the march. And when they did, there was an individual, a white guy, who was dressed in full combat gear, had a pistol, had a badge. Ostensibly some kind of law enforcement. We didn't know because they refused to identify themselves. And when they were asked who they were and what they were doing, they said, "We're here to defend property." And it was kind of, like a little bit jarring. Some people, that was at that point in time, the march kind of had dissipated. It stopped before it even went downtown because these armed groups came out of the shadows. and they literally came out of the
They
shadows.
literally came out of the shadows.
They went behind a building and were in an alleyway talking with each other, and they came out and, like, guns blazing, literally, and scared a lot of people, and people left. The police didn't do anything, obviously, but as we were walking back to our offices, those three individuals, or those two individuals, the third one, I don't know what happened to him, who had been following us the entire time. These three white guys followed us. They literally saw us walking as a group back to our offices, and as we were opening the office door, the lights were off, and I thought that was kind of strange because we had people there who were providing water and providing security for
They had
folks.
been there all night,
Right.
posted up in case we had to run and come back to the office for safety.
And just to provide food. And what happened is, as I was opening the door, because I was ahead of everyone, I saw those guys. They were across the street, and they started running across the street. And one of the guys started reaching down in his crotch, and he was pulling out a gun. I saw the handle of it, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he stopped, and he kind of got like a little bit flustered, and he came towards me. He still had his hands down on his crotch, and he was like pulling out a pistol, and I could see it. And the other guy was like pulling out his pistol as well. They were about ready to shoot us. There's a group of us, like all indigenous people, trying to get into our office, and we started yelling at them. And then they got scared, and they're like, "Oh, we're here to protect property, blah blah blah." And like they literally accused us of looting our own office and breaking into our own office. And then after that had happened, this New Mexico Civil Guard group, which I don't think these two guys were associated with. They were from out of town. They had Texas license plates.
But who can tell the difference?
Yeah.
I actually just found out that one of the new New Mexico Civil Guard closed groups is being administered by a white woman who has a Texas militia, like insignia, as one of her public photos on her Facebook profile. So, I mean, who knows? Who knows if they were affiliated with each other? How am I supposed to be able to fucking tell?
Yeah. And one of the legal observers had actually spoken with several of the guys. Some of them admitted that they were from, or said they were from, Illinois, Arizona, California, Colorado, and Texas.
Oklahoma.
Also. So these were the outside agitators that these fascist groups had brought in, who were working hand in hand with the police to actually do the job of the police. But obviously, like, they have, we found out later that they're infiltrated by white supremacists, or they were just white supremacists to begin with. Who can tell? But they sat outside our office for about an hour. There's 7 of them. They all had beards. They were all white. Many of them were big, like, not like fit, but like big dudes. And they didn't look like they knew how to handle weapons very well. They didn't actually know a lot of, like, weapon safety, first of all. And secondly, they, as we approached them, they said, "Hey, they're like, why are you filming us?" And I said, "Well," I was like, "why are you standing outside of our office with machine guns?" They said, "Well, why don't you come over here and talk to me?" And I said, "Why don't you put your gun down first?" But I think this is the key of, like, what fascism actually is. Like, these guys come out and they say, "Oh, we're against the government because the government's trying to take away our guns," but nonetheless, they're actually doing the government's job, and they're actually doing the state's job. They're doing the police's job. They're profiling us. They're actually, they see lawlessness as something that needs to be answered with armed vigilante violence. But before we get into that, I was wondering if maybe Brandon or Justine or both of you could just maybe talk about encountering these same kind of forces out in Gallup.
Yeah. I was there in Albuquerque and Gallup. So back up a little bit before we get on to Gallup. In Albuquerque, I was there. We had already gone into our office, and I was already washing my hands when we got back from the march and everything. The march itself had already gone, like, pretty I would say messy, no lie. We straight up got kettled into a neighborhood, and these white supremacists and their white vans and everything had the neighborhood, like, completely surrounded.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a pretty dangerous situation. Luckily, everybody seemingly had made it out safe. I'm not sure. I heard some people got tear gas. I didn't see for myself. But after we left that part of the neighborhood, more more east on Lomas, we started heading west down Central, and when we got back down, that's when we saw those JW gym folks, and they like straight up like look like they were busting into like as a SWAT team, because that's how
Yeah.
they all just like came through into and poured out of this alleyway into the road.
They
And
were like
like that
information or something.
immediately caught my attention. I was like, what the fuck? I was like, what's going on? And they all had like the JW logo on their shirts, and so I was just like, who are you guys? And one of them like looked at me exactly how a cop looks at me every single time, and I knew immediately that this fucker was a cop. And I was like, are you guys cops? And they're just like, oh no, we're just here, it was obvious these fuckers were cops. They were there to straight up like detain and arrest like civilians. They had like all these like zip ties and shit on them. And like we have people all over the United States right now like straight up getting abducted by these fucking militias because they're out there, you know, doing their vigilante whatever the fuck. And they're straight up like capturing like people off of like the backs of crowds and like abducting them. And so when after that, it was kind of like, all right, everybody needs to get the fuck out of here, because these guys are ready to just inflict violence on a bunch of, you know, Black, Indigenous, brown people. And so everybody started heading back. My partner and Kai, we think that this might be the reason that they were like so alerted at the Red Nation. But TJ and Kai like straight up they
They had a
raced.
foot race.
They had
Yeah,
a
I
foot
remember
race
that
for the last block
'Cause-
of the
because TJ
of
started
the
running.
route.
Because TJ started running
Yeah.
again, and he wanted to see how fast he was.
Yeah, they're like, ha ha, let's have a race. And so they race back to the door, and I think that's kind of what
Forgot
might
about
gotten
that.
them on alert. But then too, I really think that they had already been staking out the Red Nation office. I know that they had been targeting us. Melanie, you said that they were watching us. I had no idea when we were marching.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they had their eyes on us the entire time. We know one of our comrades inside the office had seen these fools walk by at least once. Because when we're in the office, it's a busy street. We're not always watching, you know, everyone who passes in front of the office. So I'm certain that they passed in front of our office multiple times, and they staked it out. And we're an Indigenous Liberation office, the fucking Larry Kassouf's Freedom Center. So we have like all of like our like Indigenous liberation like propaganda posted on the fronts of our office. It's obvious like who the fuck we are, who's in that office. And these fools, there was I when I looked at the picture, I counted 10 of them armed with their AR-15s. They were posted up a block from the Red Nation office. So you know that these fuckers were targeting us like all goddamn night. And we we didn't do like a damn thing. It just it blows my mind that these fuckers like showed up just to fucking like hound a bunch of Indians. And that's exactly what I said when Nick was at the front door talking to these fools and saying like, what the fuck are you doing here? Why the fuck do you have guns? I like turned around and I noticed that like Nick wasn't right in back of me, and I was like, oh my god, where are they? And I was like, wait, something's fucking going on. And so like I go to the door and I'm like ready, like I'm like "Rrr, rrr," like I will fuck you up. and I was like, Nick was like, why are you here? And then like they're like, you know, in their, they couldn't say anything. They're like, obviously they couldn't say, we're here to kill a bunch of fucking Indians. So I said it for them. Why? You here to kill a bunch of fucking Indians? You here to like, oh no, or because we're a bunch of fucking Indians? And like,
yep.
Like, and then, you know, there's just like, I have 2 kids who are Native. And it's just like, yeah, you know, who else? Fucking conquistadors. Fuck you. And but yeah, man, Melanie like dead ass. Her grip on my arm like got real firm. Like she literally held me back. I was just like, I was ready to go.
The only reason I did that was because they were retreating, and I was like, okay, well, if we escalate, if this gets escalated, then we're gonna have to like get into a street fight. We would have won.
Yeah,
but
yeah. There's
like,
there's 20 of us. There's at least 25 of us inside, and like everybody was piling to the door, and I think that's actually what scared them off, because they didn't know there was that many of us in there, and they thought they were only going to they thought that they were going to come up to just, you know, a couple Indians and be able to harass them. But
it's like an Indian
not
car
today.
when it pulls up, when your uncle pulls up in his Indian car,
Like
and
in a
you just think
van?
it's like one of them, but then there's like
Yeah.
15 in that little
And all your other uncles pour out.
And
yeah,
Right.
everyone
Yeah.
comes out.
all your cousins.
All your cousins. A new uncles,
You
my
thought-
clan.
For real though, they had no idea.
Can I just add one thing before we move on to Gallup? Thanks for
Yeah.
filling that story out, Justine.
Yeah.
You know that bullshit line that they were like, we have Native children, we love Native Americans. I guess so. KUNM, which is like a local, it's actually the radio station and the media outlet that's affiliated with the University of New Mexico here in Albuquerque. They did an interview with that Bryce Spangler, Provence
The
guy,
neo-Nazi.
the neo-Nazi and neo-Confederate white supremacist chud. And I guess one of his talking points when they were like, so are you a racist? He's like, I love Native Americans. He's like, I am Cherokee, you know, on my mom's side or whatever.
Oh my
And-
god.
And so I guess like the New Mexico Civil Guard people have been claiming that they have like Native spouses. And this also happened in Gallup too. We can talk more about this with those business owners who invited these fucks to Gallup to terrorize people at that BLM protest. But, you know, this claim that like, come on, like my great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess bullshit. And like, I love Native Americans. I have friends. I have Native American friends. Like, come on. I can't believe this is a talking point that media is actually using to justify this behavior. Everybody knows.
Wait till they find out that the Cherokee Nation sided with the Confederacy during the Civil War. it's like newsflash. History's complicated.
Oh, 5 civilized tribes. Ooh.
Yeah. It's like nothing against Cherokee Nation, but like you have been on the wrong side of history quite a few times.
But also, nobody gives a shit if you have Native friends. Like, nobody gives a shit if your great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess. Like, all the Native people
Especially
who hear
that
you
one.
saying that, especially that one.
Unless
like,
you're Elizabeth Warren. Don't hound my girl Liz,
I don't give a
please.
shit about Elizabeth
Oh my
Warren.
god.
I use Elizabeth Warren. Like, we fucking make fun of her as an opening line in my Native American Studies class, all right? And all of my Native students are like, yeah, she's trash. Like, you're saying these things, and then Native people are listening to you, and all we're doing is fucking making fun of you.
Dead ass.
I mean, you deserve worse, but like,
So
those talking points just tell you how dumb fascists are.
So one time I was driving through Oklahoma and I stopped at a gas station and there was a Confederate flag in a dream catcher. So Cherokee,
Wow.
Cherokee
Oh
pride.
god, I've
Bryce
seen
must
those.
Bryce was here. Was there something in the bathroom that said
Yeah.
Bryce Provence was
Bryce
here?
Provence was here. Chaplain.
Chaplain.
Well, I think it's important to also note with the KUNM reporting and other things that the New Mexico Civil Guard actually posted and then deleted a call for an armed protest, intimating an armed protest outside of our offices.
About a week later.
And then the morons actually posted that they were going to bring guns to UNM campus. Like they literally like threatened to bring guns to protest KUNM, the public radio station.
They said they would be practicing their full constitutional rights on the sidewalk, is
Right.
what they said. So the implication of that is that they would be armed. And then, of course, practicing free speech or whatever.
Yeah. And the morons like don't understand that UNM again has a firearms ban. And so they took the post down immediately, but it just shows the level of intelligence and buffoonery. I can't believe it. I think that's the first time I've ever said that word out loud.
Buffoonery.
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 That's exactly what
Burn.
it is.
It is.
Burn.
Oh god, I know. And do you know what's so ridiculous? Like, your boy Bryce. I'm just kidding, not your boy.
My Cherokee
our
brother.
boy Bryce, though, he's not even allowed to be carrying a firearm in the first place. He's prohibited from possessing a firearm in the state of New Mexico since May 2nd. Not May 2nd. That's a different date. But yeah, it's he's been prohibited for years from even carrying a fucking gun, this asshole.
Yeah, it's also important to remember that like a lot of these people are former law enforcement. Some of them have said that they are current law enforcement. Others have said they're former military. Others have said they're active military. And one of the things that's really important, this gets
Some
into
of
the
them are
conversation.
prison guards too.
Some of them are prison guards, but this gets into a larger question about like domestic violence and gendered violence. This guy Bryce has like a long rap sheet of beating women. He's a wife beater, and if there was ever a gun law implemented, you know, like around, and I'm not advocating for any kind of law, but just to show you the contradictions of what they're talking about and like how misogynistic the culture and racist this culture is around gun culture, is that if they implemented any kind of a gun law that like bans people with domestic violence charges from carrying a weapon, that would like include 40% of law enforcement would not be able to carry a weapon. Like, think about that. Like, these guys are misogynists. The violence that they inflict in their jobs, they carry home with them to their spouses and their children. So,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it only takes about, I was reading somewhere, like it takes 1,500 to 2,000 hours of training to become a hairstylist. And it only takes like just over 600 hours to train to be a police officer.
Oh my god.
Like,
Oh
so
my
there's
god, I read
these
that
are
too. So,
yeah, these are established
in some
facts.
states, yeah, in some states,
Wow.
hairstylists need over 1,000 hours more training than fucking police officers
wow.
Wow.
to cut
Well, it
hair.
only takes one
and use
Facebook
barbicide.
post to become a chud.
Hey, and you know what? It takes further training to even use something like barbicide.
What is barbicide?
Oh god.
It's that sanitizer for your scissors or whatever the hell. But I'm
Oh.
basically saying, like, you have to go through more
Dang,
training to
that's
use a
game dropping
goddamn
knowledge.
sanitizer than to goddamn kill people.
Mm.
It is.
Wow.
It's a hell world.
Well, let's move on to Gallup. Speaking of hell worlds.
Yeah, nice segue. Nice segue.
That was a great transition.
Brandon, you had like, let's start with you because you were there before you know, the march started and you were talking to people on the streets. What was the situation?
Yeah. So what happened was, first, I really didn't have any intention on participating in the march, only because it seemed it was organized on the fly, and so there was like, at first it just seemed like there was rumors of a march happening. So I was like, okay, and then we saw a post from the so-called True Patriot Foundation, which was founded by the director of Gallup Cultural Center, James Eby. And so I saw his post and how they were, you know, welcoming the assistance from the New Mexico Chud Guard. And so that incensed me, seeing how they had treated you all in Albuquerque. And so I kept that in the back of my mind. And then that's on Wednesdays, that day is when I usually do grocery shopping, you know, for my young family. And what really like lit my fuse was I was grocery shopping and I knew the cashier who was ringing me up, and you know, I asked him how he was doing, how's his family doing, and you know, told him I'm glad to see that you all aren't boarding up your windows. And then he goes, yeah, you know what? I was going to ask the manager we should board up our windows because the busloads of rioters and looters are coming into town. And this guy's like the most liberal leaning person you could meet in Gallup, like one of the most liberal leaning folks. And for him to have fallen for like this racist hoax that was started by a white supremacist Twitter account, you know, I was upset. So that pissed me off. And so I told him like, that's a racist lie. And I looked in the line behind me, and, you know, it's like another line of white liberals shopping at this place. And I said, you know, like, if we see people armed and are walking the streets of Gallup, and at the time I said, I'm not going to confront them because I'm likely to be murdered more than any of you all in this line. Mm-hmm. So if a Black or Indigenous person were to approach them, I am the one that's going to get shot. So it's up to you all in this, like, who can hear me now. That's your responsibility. Like, if you see these fascist white supremacists walking the streets of Gallup, it's up to you to confront them because I will die. Like if I want to confront them, I will die. And this lady's like, oh yeah, man, I'm a total ally. Like I get it. I don't know how racist Gallup was. And she was like a teacher in Gallup. So I left kind of like, a little bit heated and got my vehicle, went back, dropped off the groceries and came back because I had some trash to drop off. And as I was driving to the recycling center, I saw this white van park and these two biker motorcycle club looking guys get out. And I thought, is this like part of the group that's supposed to come, part of the Mexico Silver Guard or like one of the white assholes who are going to terrorize Black and Indigenous people? So I saw them get out. They parked by Pinnacle Bank in Gallup. And I thought, oh, maybe just, walking to deposit drug meal money or something. I don't know. And so they kept walking. They walked past the bank. So, okay, so they're definitely part of something else. So I circled my truck around. And as I was driving, I wanted to see if the hysteria was true that was being posted on like various social media about Gallup. Because somebody in Gallup had posted photos of businesses in downtown Gallup boarding up their windows. And the caption was like, all businesses in Gallup are boarding up their windows as they prepare for looters. And I drove around downtown Gallup, and I'm sure you all did too, Melanie and Justine, when you were there. There was like 10 businesses out of like the hundreds of businesses that exploit Native people. Like there's like a small fraction of them that actually boarded up their windows and that we publicly shamed later on. And at that point, I didn't really see anybody armed yet. I didn't see because I got there early. They are Silver Dust Trading, or Silver Dust Trading, Richardson's Trading, Denny Pino's, Jules and Java, Quintana's Music Store, Highway 66 Smoke Shop. I believe that's those 6 that I can remember right off the top of my head right now. And so, I was driving around and then I drove up to where Camille's Cafe is. And that's where I saw a group of the biker looking guys there. And so I was pretty pissed at this point because I saw like a group of people who were looking to intimidate, the marchers. So I actually pulled into Camille's and confronted this group. And this group, they look like I thought it was like a high risk for COVID-19 support group because these guys are like really short and old. And they're really short and old and, very unhealthy looking.
Yeah.
So I felt a twinge of like guilt approaching them because I was really upset. And they saw me because I was like waving at them from my truck before I pulled into the parking lot. The master. No, it was the lost Hispanic race, the lost white Hispanic race, and
still the master race,
still called master race. Yeah, and it was funny because they're like all standing all tough, and then they see me get out of the truck, and they're like, "Whoa!" Like I was
the tallest Hopi in the world.
Yeah, and then, so I started walking up to them, and I thought I was recording, and I wish I was, but it wasn't. I recorded like 2 seconds of my feet. And I approached him.
The biggest
press record
in the world.
Yeah, biggest yeah. Because I was like, oh, like I guess I was like just nervous from anger and approaching them honestly because I didn't know they were armed. So I pressed record, and I know like I probably held the record button too long as well. Anyway, so I'm walking up to the group and I started interrogating them. I was pissed, and started interrogating them like, where you all from? Like, we're from here. I was like, well, I don't see you all from here, and back and forth went on. And then one of the shortest one, this really old guy, said, well, we're here to protect our friend's place, talking about Camille's Cafe, because, buses of riders are coming in. That's why I started demanding proof. I was like, where's the proof? Because we don't have to show you proofs. Like, well, then why are you here? And that's the overarching reason behind this in Gallup and all these other small towns and even across the so-called United States, is that there's this racist rumor that started from a Twitter account that, was later revealed to have been run by this white supremacist group called Identity Europa. And Identity Europa had started these racist rumors about busloads of riders going to white neighborhoods and destroying and looting businesses. And this was debunked like days before the BLM protest march in Gallup. So, critical thinking isn't a value among like white conservatives or white supremacist groups. And so, I was telling them that's a racist rumor. And then they pull out, like we were saying earlier, they pulled out all the same lines. Like, I'm married to a Navajo, or my grandkids are Native American. And so one guy was like, I'm married to a Navajo. I was like, I don't give a fuck. He's like, well, okay. He's like, they get flustered. Like, they think they have you. And then they're trying to so they're like all flustered already. And then like the best comeback they could say was, oh, I bet you vote Democrat. And I was looking at them, I was like,
I don't even vote.
Yeah. So this is what I said.
Democrats.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. So this is what I said. I said, fuck the Democrats and fuck Donald Trump. And they're like, really, they didn't know how to respond to that. I was like, I'm an anarchist and I'm anti-fascist. And I love, yeah. So their heads were totally, they were looking at me like, how do we respond to this? Yeah. And so I said, I love eating at Camille's. I said, you guys are fascists, right? And they didn't say anything. I was like, you guys are fascists. I'm anti-fascist. We should film a commercial right now for Camille's. Where fascists and anti-fascists beat to eat. So they didn't know what to say. Like, they were just like, they just turned away. And I said, Native people will protect people on this land. Like, this is indigenous territory. This is Pebble Terry. This is Diné territory. We will protect our own. We will protect the people that's on our territories. And then they're like, well, I'll see this on Facebook. I said, no, you won't. And then they couldn't say anything. So then I was really mad, got in my truck and drove around some more because they couldn't do anything. They couldn't say anything, and they refused to answer any more of my questions. So then I turned back, I got back into my vehicle, flipped them off, and drove off. And as I was driving, I saw a group of what looked to me like a group of kids holding guns, and I call them like little Jawas because they're like all wrapped up. Yeah. So I pulled my truck over again in downtown Cal, and this all happens, like this whole story, it all happens like within a span of 30 minutes. So I drive from Camille's, I'm driving around, and I'm like making note of all the businesses that are boarded up. And then I pull over because I see this group of Jawas in line carrying rifles. So I got out, and I sincerely thought there were little kids. I was pissed, like, who let little kids walk around in camo carrying guns? But these were fully grown adults, apparently, just tiny people. It was a woman and two tiny men, all very tiny, and
tiny in more ways than one.
So-
yeah, tiny in more ways than one. They didn't have like, if there was a gunfight, they had like the least powerful guns to begin with. It was just all show. And so, I confronted them. I was like saying, who the fuck are you guys? Like, what are you doing out here? And like, they didn't know how to respond. So I chased them all the way back. I was like telling them, get the fuck back to where you belong. And so I followed them, and they walked to Danny Pino's. And Danny Pino's is like it's a head shop in Gallup. And up on the roof, there were two more people who were armed, and there were more people that are armed at Danny Pino's. So I told them, we got to get the fuck out of here. You better not be intimidating Black and Indigenous people who are in this march. And they couldn't say anything. And when you confront them, they don't know what to say. As apparently, they try to reason by this false narrative of because I know a Native person, and among them were Native people. I think one of the little Jawa people were Nawas was Native, and so they didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to respond. And right across the street from them, I thought I'd follow them, made sure they went back inside Denny Pino's store. Got in my truck, and I was driving off. And then on the south side of Route 66 at Jules and Java, I saw a group of armed men there, and I saw an AR leaning up against the wall. So I pulled in and brought out my camera again and confronted them. And, went through the same line of interrogation. Where are you all from? Provide me proof. And, went back and forth. And this older man came out and was speaking Arabic. And and Gallup has a very long history of Palestinian people who have opened trading posts or trading shops and curio shops and wholesaler shops in Gallup for at least over 70 years. And so I asked him, the guy that was armed, he had a armored plates on, armored vest on. I said, are you Palestinian? He said, yes. And I said, do you not see the contradiction here? Like, you're protecting property that's built on stolen land. You're protecting a settlement that's built on stolen land. I said, join us in the march. Like, there's white supremacists, there are literal white supremacists walking the streets here. There are Zionists and there are settler colonialists who are intimidating Black and Indigenous people. Join us. And he kept saying, I don't want to. Like, basically saying he doesn't want to. So that was sad, but not surprising, given the history of Palestinian business owners in Gallup. So it would have been awesome. It would have been awesome if they joined us in the march. I kept trying to convince them to join us in the march, all of them there. And, toward the end of the argument, this older Palestinian man came out and he was sitting there watching us out of the corner of my eye. And I could see that he was looking at was possibly his grandson or his son. And he was like slowly shaking his head. So I put my camera away and the older man came up to me. He's like, I support the marchers. And then he looks at his son and he goes, I don't know what they're doing. He goes, but I support the marchers. And I wish I had that on camera. I wish I recorded that part, because I was like, okay, so the patriarch of this family is obviously like ashamed of what his children or grandchildren are doing. And so then I left and approached another group. So there's about 5 different groups that I approached, which I do not recommend to do alone. And which
you're just out there raging by yourself.
I was out there raging because I was pissed. And what really pissed me off was the fact that they were daring to intimidate and harm Black and Indigenous people and youth who are part of this march. Mm-hmm. And that how dare they think they could get away with this on our Indigenous territory, on Indigenous land, and how anyone could dare to think that they could come here and raise arms against Black and Indigenous people on our territory instead of against the state. Because that's the romantic story of the Second Amendment, right? Was that, we build our militias to defend ourselves against the state. And when in reality, the militia was always built to contain Black and Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. So, they go under that pretense of, we're here to assert our 2A rights. And they're just really fulfilling the purpose of the 2A, was to contain Black and Indigenous people. And so history made a whole loop again.
And then they also just have a selective reading of the Constitution as well. Like the Third Amendment actually, prohibits civilians from harboring the U.S. military in their homes. Mm-hmm. And on the New Mexico Civil Guard page, they were complaining that the District of Columbia didn't allow or like kicked out like the civil mayor from their it was like they only got to the Second Amendment in their reading of the Constitution. I know it's a tough one, guys. I know it's a tough one. It's a hard document to read.
I know counting to 3 is tough for y'all.
Yeah,
but
it takes more than 2 fingers. But also
they can't count to 4 because it's too sacred. Just kidding.
Sacred. Yeah. So then I approached this other group. This is the 4th group. And that was next to Jules and Java. And again, I don't recommend doing this, but I was so incensed. And what brought me further into like this rage that built inside me was I had actually printed out a picture of George Floyd when he was 5 years old and he's hanging on to his mother. And I had that on me because I was going to put it up on my office wall, which it is now. And it was folded up in my back pocket. And I would look at that photo and just continue to think, how dare they? Like, how dare they? And so I walked to this 4th group. And so they're being a bit more insidious with how they're saying they support the marchers, but they were also there to protect their property, which they wouldn't name. And so when I first approached them, they lied, saying that they're Mexican American. And I think I showed you all the video where like me and this other guy, this bearded bro, got into it and basically said, "Fuck you, you fucking settler," and he sat down. And so he just sat down because he didn't know what else to do. Like someone come at him like that.
I remember he was like so disheartened by being called a settler.
Yeah,
he had never been called a settler in his life.
And then this other like scrawny dude came out. He's like, "Oh yeah, man, I'm all about Black Lives Matter," and then like gave me a fist bump. So I was like, okay. And because they wouldn't, they were just like I said, I think they're frazzled by like a native person actually came out to confront them on their bullshit. And so as I was leaving, I left my truck parked at Jules and Joe next to the Palestinian business place. And because I saw James Eby. James Eby was walking with somebody else. So I confronted him in the street again. Telling
Who's
me he's
James Eby?
Oh, James Eby. He's the one that, as I said earlier, founded the True Patriots Foundation page.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And who is the director, again, of Gallup Cultural Center.
And he invited white militias to help, quote unquote, protect private property.
Exactly. And so we had and I cussed him out in front of a cop. A cop pulled over and was recording me as I was like laying into James Eby. I call him a fucking fascist, you fucking white supremacist. And then he just turned around and walked off, him and his buddy. And whoever, I don't know who the second person was. So as I was walking back to my truck, that fourth group, the one where they lied and said they were Mexican American, came up with bottles of water saying, hey, we just want to apologize. We're actually Arab. We're actually Arab American. We just want to say like we're with the protesters. We love native businesses. And I go, what's your native business? I go, what's your business? Like, what's the name of your business here? And he wouldn't say. And he goes, no, we're a wholesaler. So I said, you exploit. So then you exploit native culture then. And then he goes, what's wrong with that? And he goes, I gotta make money somehow. I go, you don't see what's wrong with that? And so again, it goes into that loop of they don't mind. They don't mind exploiting native lives and culture in Gallup, no matter what their intention is. So I didn't accept his water, and he got all butthurt about it, and then went back to his tiny bearded group of bros. And so and I was pissed, and walked back to. By then, the marchers were coming through, and then that's where I got mad at them again. That's what James Eby was still as we're arguing in the street, and then you could hear the marchers in the background. And I said, it's been an hour and a half and not one rock has been thrown. Not one building has been destroyed. Like you all fell for a white supremacist hoax because you would rather take up arms against citizens rather than against the state. Mm-hmm. You're choosing to side with state violence than with citizens who are the victims of state violence. And so that was Gallup. And, so between all that, I actually went back to Camille's, because I actually do like their smoothies. And, I was thirsty. After cussing out white supremacists all day, I was like, I'm kind of parched.
Yeah, so my jaw needs some ice.
Yeah, my jaw needs some ice. And so I went back to Camille's, like with no intention of like provoking anything. It's like I'm just gonna go inside, grab me a smoothie, and then head out, not knowing that the owner would be there. So I pull up, and there's a larger group of this motorcycle club now. So that first one, the high risk COVID-19 support group, they call themselves they call themselves the Endless Riders. So they have the tiny American flags and the tiny Gabston flag, the Don't Tread on Me flag on their patches. And then there was the Bandidos there. The Bandito Motorcycle Club was there. And the owner of Camille's was there because I tried to go in, and he's like, it's closed. So he came at me all wrong. And so I started going back to them all wrong and saying, so where's the busloads of riders, guys? Like, where's the busloads of looters? So, I don't know. You tell us. I go, I tell you where they're at. They're in fantasy land because you guys fell for a hoax. You're morons and you don't belong here. And again, I told them to get the fuck out of here. I said, I better not catch you guys intimidating Black and Indigenous people or any of the marchers. And for a group of tough, burly biker people, they had nothing to say, quiet. And, once again gave them the number one salute. And it wasn't until I was leaving, they finally got were to be able to say something. And I didn't quite catch what they said as I was leaving. And so James Rich in Gallup, he's not only
the owner of Camille's, right?
The owner of Camille's, and he owns a business. I think it's called QSR High Country. They own practically all of the Taco Bell and KFC franchises in the Colorado Plateau.
God, Love KFC.
Yeah, so
Chicken sandwiches.
the KFC and Taco Bell's on Navajo Nation
Fucking ruined
are
it for
run
me.
by James Rich. The KFC and Taco Bell's up all the way up to like Colorado Springs,
Damn.
all the way up and down. Yeah, that company. He runs that company that owns all of these franchises. So when you look on his Facebook page, he seems to be like the main instigator of, purporting the phantom buses of
Yep.
looters and rioters coming in. And because he holds so much clout, and because he comes from a long line of Gallup business owners, I think his grandfather, there's a business that's been in Gallup for a long time. I can't recall the name of it right now, but it's changed names a few times. But it's a really old restaurant in Gallup, and that's his grandfather's one that started that, and taught him the ropes of running a business on stolen land. So he's obviously become very good at it. And so when I approached him and left, didn't really know who he was at the time, and followed the marchers, making sure that they're okay. Nothing happened, which is good and bad. But at the end of the day, like nobody got shot, nobody got killed, thankfully, by a trigger happy white supremacist. And so that's how it went down in Gallup. Then we posted, and then we posted our experience and named the businesses in Facebook. And then that post got removed by Facebook because someone had reported it enough times. And so we're going to actually make a video about that, about the post and about the businesses themselves. And but during that time, that's when we all saw all like who the native bootlickers are in Gallup. Because a lot of them, because people send us private messages saying the reason why these people are commenting on that page is because they either work at the stores that were named or they work for James Rich. So all these native folks were piling onto the comments saying, like stupid things like, oh, they have non-white employees or non-white spouses or non-white friends. How can they be racist? Or they're not white. Like, how can they be racist? And so we spent like a lot of labor trying to educate people on social media on what the structures of racism and white supremacy are, which is a moot point. Nobody's ever been convinced by a comment on Facebook. That's my belief. But we tried anyway. I tried. I think Melanie said you have a lot of patience, Brandon. And I think I wrongfully placed my patience in trying to convert people over social media or educate people. And so that was our experience, with Gallup is people weren't aware of how racist Gallup is. People, they may be critical thinkers in one area, but when it comes to the bodies and lives of Black and Indigenous people, they turn that off and just readily believe whatever conservative news media is feeding them. They choose to outsource a human trait, their critical thinking abilities, when it concerns Black and Indigenous people on stolen land.
Well, it's important to also point out that McKinley County, where Gallup is like the poorest county in the state. It's also almost a majority. I think it is a majority Navajo, isn't it? Or a majority Native.
Yeah.
But it's also a hotbed of Democratic Party activity in the state. Like most of the people there most of the political elite consider themselves liberals. And it's the same here in Albuquerque. Like Mayor Keller, after George Floyd was murdered by police, and everyone saw that he was murdered by police, gave a speech in support of the Albuquerque Police Department. The Albuquerque Police Department then went and met with armed right-wing white supremacist militia groups and said, how can we best police Black and Indigenous people who are going to be protesting in the city? So we see how easily liberals in this state align themselves with like a fascist agenda in this country. And it shouldn't surprise anyone, especially in a place like Gallup, especially in a place like Albuquerque. And these two cities specifically wanted like distinguish themselves from like a place like Farmington, where you have the sheriff of Farmington, Sheriff Ferrari, who was marching under a Nazi flag, a literal Nazi flag, at an anti-lockdown protest with the New Mexico Civil Guard. Like, it doesn't get any more explicit than this. Like, people think that we're
Literally.
like, while, yeah, it literally doesn't get any more explicit. And then he didn't even condemn the Nazi flag. He just said on his Facebook page, the Sheriff Ferrari said, well, we all have the right to free speech. But he was, as a police officer on duty in uniform, the only person masked up. He wasn't part of the high risk COVID-19 club.
Maybe he is. That's why he's masked up.
Yeah, that's true. He didn't want to get his buddies, his fascist buddies, sick.
Well, you also have Michelle Lujan Grisham, who's a Democratic governor, apparently still on the short list for VP for Biden's ticket for the presidential election this year. And, in 2013, 2014, Albuquerque had the highest number of fatal police shootings of any city in the country. And then New Mexico from 2015 to 2019, probably going to be at the top of the list again for 2020, is at the top of all of the states in the United States for fatal police shootings, like under her watch, and then the transition to her watch from Susana Martinez's regime a few years ago. And so, New Mexico is just still at the top of the charts when it comes to police violence, and Democrat or Republican, like white supremacy and like racism against Black and Indigenous people and just poor people of color in general and migrants in this state still puts us at the very top of racism in this country and at the very bottom of like the well-being of people in terms of healthcare and education and housing. Homelessness has actually gone up. I think it's like 5 times in the last 5 years. There are 5 times more unsheltered people in Albuquerque than there were when, like there was the last uprising against police violence in Albuquerque. This is a racist, violent ass state.
Mm-hmm. It's also important to point out as well that like Mayor Keller, in response to the growing demand to defund the police, said that actually, in fact, that the police budget needs to be increased in the city and that crime is still a problem. And at one point in time, the Albuquerque Police Department made up 20% of the city's homicides because it killed so many people. And this doesn't include the people who like die in custody, because oftentimes those people aren't counted. And just to clarify for folks, like we stand like 100% in solidarity with Black Lives and the Black Lives Matter movement. But a place like, New Mexico, the Black population is around 3% of the state. Mm-hmm. And there's rampant anti-Blackness within Indigenous communities and within the state itself, especially within the Hispano and self-identified Anglo populations, right? And so that's something that we inherited. Not we, I'm not even from here, but that's something that this state inherited from the United States. This anti-Black racism, this white supremacy. It's filtered into the kind of racial hierarchy of the state, but the majority of police violence that's enacted in this state is against Indigenous people and against brown people, specifically like the Nuevo Mexicanos, or the people who are descendant of Indigenous people
and migrants
as well at the border, because they had like those armed militia guys that at the border that many of them are actually part of the New Mexico Civil Guard. They were so racist that the Border Patrol had to say, "You guys are being a little too racist. Can you like tone it down?" This is the New Mexico Civil Guard.
Ugh.
Yeah. So, Justine, do you want to give like a breakdown of like what happened? You were there as well.
Yeah, in Gallup. Oh yeah, I've been waiting.
Bring it, Justine.
Yeah, no. First of all, I thank you, Brandon, for that breakdown of border town violence, the legacy of Gallup, and also for being that like rowdy ass uncle out there in the streets. That was definitely needed. Matt coming for all these white supremacists. But yeah, no. So just like Brandon had said, like the action in Gallup, the march in Gallup, kind of started circulating on social media. It was like a bunch of like hearsay, and so by the time it got to Red Nation here in Albuquerque, it was kind of like, oh, one of our comrades who has a friend in Gallup like says that their friend says that this thing's going on. And so we're like, oh, okay. And then it got kind of big, and we're like, okay, yeah, so there's definitely something going on in Gallup. And because we had encountered, the New Mexico Civil Guard and white supremacists and just police and everything, just the whole shit show it was here in Albuquerque, we're like, absolutely not in Gallup. That is a crowd full of like our Navajo relatives and indigenous and black folks, and we're like, not in Gallup. Like, Gallup is the most, first of all, Gallup calls themselves the most patriotic city in America, right?
Small
And
town.
so small town in America, yeah. And so God, so we just knew, we're just like, if we don't go there, like, there's the potential that a bunch of our relatives are straight up going to get their asses beat in the street. And so that was like where we were coming from as Red Nation. Like, we got to go out there and protect these folks. And so we loaded up. So the decision to actually go to Gallup, it's about 2.5 hours away from Albuquerque, almost 3.
Yeah,
and so we made the decision within like 45 minutes to get up and go. And so we loaded a bunch of queer indigenous femmes into 2 rowdy commie trucks and just bolted out there. Like, once we got on the scene, like, those fucking chodes like did not know what to do. They were like, oh my god, they had never seen like just a bunch of like rad like rowdy femmes just bust out of these like 2 commie trucks, and just like, we had our we had like our walkie-talkie earpieces, like, yes, 10-4, white supremacist on the corner, like. And we're even driving up, we're like, we had the walkie-talkies going, like, driving up, we're like, this is Tatanka calling for oh man, I don't even remember.
what was it?
I don't remember our code names anymore.
Tatanka calling for Victor.
Yeah. but yeah, so we were like, we
Big
showed
Papa.
up like
It was
organized
Big
as
Papa.
hell. Oh yeah.
Melanie had her fingerless racing gloves.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah, she did. Oh my god.
It was so I could grip a bitch better if I had to.
And throw him to the ground.
So I could drag better if I had to.
Yes. 100%
My tiny Chucky
needed.
hands. Yes, I have tiny Chucky hands. I can't grip shit. Okay.
One time we had a drag show, the South Broadway Cultural Center, and one of the drag queens was like looking at all the shoes that were sitting around, and she's like, whose shoes are these? They're like the smallest ones, and Melanie's like, those are mine. And she's like, oh, you have Chucky feet.
Like a big ass drag queen.
Oh my god, Chucky feet.
Yes, I have tiny hands
Chucky
and tiny feet.
Melanie
Anyway,
will
sorry,
beat your ass
Justine.
though. Nobody play no
With
games.
my fingerless gloves. Don't step on my fingerless gloves.
So when we got there, the march had already started because the Red Nation is notorious for being late. And so we
Shaking my head.
we ended up we started following the march, and we started handing out water immediately. And that was like our goal. We're like, we need water and we need masks, and we just got to make sure that everybody is, all good when we get there. So we started handing out water. And like the mood itself though, and Melanie had kind of clarified this for me, because I've only like traveled to Gallup my whole life and never really spent too much time there. But we had tried to start some chanting, but people were just kind of like really tired. And so like Melanie like sort of explained, like, I guess like the mood for some of these people is like they are severely beaten down just from living in Gallup. And so when something like this comes together, showing up is like the most, just showing up alone is like the majority of the effort. Like to say that we were going to be out there looting and destroying the city or whatever, like, is completely ridiculous. Like that's just like not the attitude going on in Gallup. And so when as we're driving, down the main drag back to downtown, we're passing, all of these business owners who had their guns just like leaning on their property, or had their hands on their hip, ready to shoot while watching the parade. I know we followed one of these, or I know one of those chodes was parked out in front of the thrift shop or whatever, and like he like had his hand on his pocket the whole time, just ready to fucking shoot somebody. And so we got to the end of the march in front of the city hall, and we had parked. Everybody busts out of the trucks right on the side of the building of Camille's. We were definitely noticed right away, and I just started taking pictures of them, and I wanted them to see that I was taking pictures of them. I'm like, I'm doxing you fuckers. And so people were rallying. It was good. And and at that point, I had already been like sort of bottled up on everything. Because that was like a crazy week leading up to this. Because the murder of George Floyd had just happened. Social media was popping off. Like Minneapolis was like really popping off. And this is something I had never seen in my life. And I was just like, whoa, like it was so like. And then, of course, when these sort of like big things happen on the social media, you see what people who aren't there yet, what they're saying. And so like, I was like a straight up like a little ball of rage, just like Brandon, when I got to Gallup, because I had no outlet this whole time. The march in Albuquerque had happened, but then like, the white supremacists, like, trying to harassing us at the end of it, that really like ruined it for me. And Red Nation wasn't planning that. And so like, my chance to actually like say something or about anything, I had been bottling up for like over a week at that point, or about a week at that point. And I got to bitch out the fucking New Mexico Civil Guard. I started rallying, and of course like my message for Gallup was basically just talking about organize. We have to out-organize these people, and we can't count on voting, and that's why I'm a revolutionary socialist, because how many times has it happened? And the crowd was like really they seemed to be really down with what I was saying. But at one point I was just like, the difference between us and these fuckers over there is these fuckers are here to take lives and to protect property, and they're here in the hopes of like seeing a bunch of indigenous people like get their asses beat, and we're here to protect lives. We're here to defend them, and that's the key difference between us and them. And I don't even remember what the hell else I said to them, but I know like I screamed at them a lot. And these fuckers but their whole presence there, sitting under a fucking canopy in front of Camille's, was infuriating, because ultimately, yeah, they were there to protect property, quote unquote, or to, maybe get a chance to kill a fucking Indian. But ultimately, like, we were already outnumbered by the cops. Not outnumbered, but the show of force by police was like already really fucking up there. And so there was absolutely no chance of any like looting or rioting going on if that was to happen in the first place, which it wasn't. But just saying, if it was, those fuckers are actually there to catch a show. They wanted to see a bunch of people get their ass beat, and that's what the fuck they were there for. They had their lawn chairs out. They were there to tailgate fucking violence against indigenous people. And what they ended up doing was just fucking playing themselves into sitting through a Black Lives Matter fucking rally, and they had to sit through it and get bitched at. And at the end of it, because nothing had popped off, because their racism didn't play out the way that they wanted it to, they still they were pretty mad, because at the end of it, Red Nation was there, and we were like completely surrounded, because in the little grid area of where downtown is, like on every corner, there was a militia member armed. The police were like, had the whole block like completely surrounded. I know there was like riot cops on top of the building behind us. They were, they're like they had their snipers or whatever posted on top of the building. And I was just like, we're all like, we can't have these people walk back to their cars by themselves. And so we made an announcement as Red Nation, like, if you are here, if you need to walk to your car, we will escort you. Do not go to your cars by yourselves. Do not walk anywhere by yourselves. If you need a ride, the Red Nation will escort you. And so we ended up escorting a bunch of youth back to their homes, back to their trailer park or wherever they were going in town. And we escorted them. And I pointed out, I said, there are cops here, there are white supremacists here. And I pointed to, every direction that they were. And the crowd was like unaware. And there was like a moment of like internal like panic that you could feel, like, oh my God, these fuckers are everywhere. And I didn't even know, and you could also feel the disappointment from those fuckers, because they knew that we knew that they were there ready to pick off people from the crowd when they had them by themselves. And they were, because after we had dispersed the crowd and made sure that the plaza was clear, everybody got out safe, at the end of it, what the fucking cops ended up doing, with a force of like 10 to 1, they actually ended up harassing two Navajo men who were there at the plaza too. And they were had them completely surrounded, and they weren't arresting them, but they were like questioning them or whatever. But whatever they were doing, they're harassing these two dudes under the guise of...
What had happened there, and I saw it start, was those two started to fight, those two young Diné men.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
They had started to fight, and then one was accusing the other of like breaking windows at his mom's house or something because they had partied out the night before. So they were ready to fight.
Okay. I had thought that the assumption was made that they were breaking windows there or some shit. But yeah, okay. But at the end of the day, that's what they ended up doing. They ended up coming around these men in a big ass group, and we just dispersed from there, and we took these kids home. And it was like really one of the best things that Red Nation had done, and God, probably like all year, being in quarantine and stuff. And that's what we do. Like, we show up for our people. We show up to protect them. We're not there to see fucking lives get taken. We're there to defend them, and that's always the difference between us and them.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to transition on too, because we do this work, and it's not like it's one of the million things that we do, and it goes without saying that the K-Info shop as well, that while there are armed fascists working with the police and city elites in this state, we are still taking care of our own people. We are still doing mutual aid work. We're still providing water, safety, food for people, because this state doesn't give a shit about Native people, right? And we understand that, and that's the alternative that we're providing. The alternative that they're providing, these parasites who don't produce anything, like who just leech off of literally Navajo lives. Like, if you think of the economy of Gallup, it's premised on taking money from Navajo people and getting them into debt, exploiting their arts and crafts industry, exploiting their culture, getting them into high interest payday loans. How many, I can't tell you how many Navajo people I know who live in Gallup who talk about when their grandmother gets, a check in the mail, that 90% of that is already claimed by a payday loan center, right? So we have our eyes on Gallup because we know that it profits off the death of Native people. And that's why we named our Freedom Center the Larry Casus Freedom Center, because Larry Casus was a Navajo freedom fighter who stood up to the elites in Gallup and, said that like Native, not, he's going to stand for it. And he died for his beliefs. He was assassinated by the Gallup Police Department. And for the longest time in the Fraternal Order of Police bar, they had a photo of the 19-year-old Larry Casus, who was gunned down by police, and they drug his body out onto the street right near Route 66, and the police stood around him and took photos of him, like as if he was, a trophy that they had just captured and caught and killed. And this was during the Wounded Knee occupation in 1973. but the spirit of the Red Nation lives, is Larry Casus. It's his legacy. It's his living legacy that we here in Albuquerque, we live right, we don't live. Our offices are right across from one of the major hospitals. And there are a lot of Native people who get denied services at these hospitals that we end up taking care of, right? We're doing the job that the state says it's doing, right? We're making sure that people have the protection and the food that they need to survive in the city. That's the alternative we're providing. We can say that like fascism, the growing creep of fascism is evidence that capitalism is decaying in this country. And this is the alternative that this white supremacist settler society is offering us. Just remember, you can't eat bullets. You can't eat guns. You can't eat dollar bills. We're growing our own food. We're beginning agricultural projects to grow our own food and implement food sovereignty so that our people not only just have canned food to eat, but they actually have traditional, healthy, indigenous foods to eat, because we operate on the premise of love, and they operate on the premise of hate. And it's important to distinguish that this is something that we understand as necessary as anti-fascist organizers to protect our communities, but it's not the only thing that we believe is self-defense. We believe growing our own food, providing security for our own communities is also a form of self-defense, and that's why they hate us. They hate us because we represent life, not just for indigenous people, but for also for Black people and for colonized people, that we represent, that we understand that the world is what is on offer for us. It's not this settler state. It's not this, the death. It's not the 116,000 people that this state has let die off because it refuses to do anything about COVID-19. And we understand that these lockdown protests that have happened here in New Mexico are directed against indigenous people, because they understand that indigenous people are the ones that are dying the most of COVID-19. I think it's like 50% of the state's deaths due to the coronavirus. And so they want us to die, right? That's why the New Mexico Civil Guard was protesting under a fucking Nazi flag in Farmington, New Mexico, because they want Native people to die, period. There's no argument. You if you want to debate us, then put your gun down and debate us. But they don't want to, because fascism doesn't operate that way. Fascism operates through coercion.
And that's why they're like so quick to defend like this settler government, because that government functions for them. That government is built for white men, for these fucking militias. And so like even through and they're right, like they're right to believe that indigenous people shouldn't exist in it, because that is the very logic of their system. The logic of settler colonialism is that indigenous people are not supposed to exist and they're supposed to be the new natives. So and that's why it always comes back to like not half-assing our politics. Like we straight up hold on, back up. There's a reason why Trump says "Make America Great Again," right? Because America, that is the legacy of America. This is settler colonialism, and through that logic, it's for indigenous people not to exist, and that's why we are 100% clear with the fact that when we say "Make America Not America Again," we fucking mean it. Sorry, I got all riled up.
No, it's good. I think I wanted to add something a little bit before we move on to some other topics. We should also do a time check.
Yeah, we should wrap up here pretty soon.
Okay. What ensued after the kind of physical, there weren't even really confrontations, just like the physical encounter on the streets with New Mexico Civil Guard in Albuquerque, or like these white business owners and like armed biker gangs in a place like Gallup, was a lot of harassment and racism online against Native women who are with the Canvo shop. Bryce Spangler,
neo-Nazi Bryce Spangler,
he actually sent me a Facebook message the day after the Black Lives Matter protests here in Albuquerque, threatening to sue me for slander because I had gone onto my Facebook page and just written about our experience with the white militias that Monday night 2 weeks ago after the Black Lives Matter protests here. And then another guy from New Mexico Civil Guard also threatened to sue me I guess they were threatening to sue other, mostly women of color, in the city for kind of like posting about them. And that's why they intended to protest outside our office, as well as KUNM. They were also kind of threatening KUNM, saying that they had engaged in slander and hate speech. And so some of the Gallup business owners, particularly the Quintana family that's associated with the Quintana Music Store, which was not boarded up, but they were armed at the protest that Wednesday, came
But
at someone.
Quintana's was boarded up.
Oh, Quintana's was boarded up. Okay.
Yeah.
Boarded up and armed. Correct?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I remember Pat driving by them. One of their family members came at a young Dene femme from the info shop really hard online, threatening that person with like physical assault. And and then like the responses that you got on the street, Brandon, when you were just speaking your mind and you were just being really direct and confrontational with these business owners. What's interesting about all of this is that like all fascists are interesting because I keep calling them dumb as shit. Like I just keep saying they're dumb as shit. I mean, the only language they speak is the language of violence. And so you can't actually debate them because they don't even really have an ideology, right? They don't even have like politics necessarily. And so if you just call them racists and white supremacists, you can battle them in the war of ideas and win that war in the media, for example, or in these other forums, because they don't have anything to say. Literally all they do is they take what they think you're a liberal, first of all, which is like the first problem. They think that Antifa is like liberals, which is hilarious to me because like no self-respecting anti-fascist would ever call themselves a liberal.
I ain't no fucking
Right?
liberal.
I ain't no fucking liberal. I ain't no fucking Democrat.
What you say, bro?
Would you call me?
Like, they can like pull a gun on you, but the moment they call you a liberal, that's like the worst fucking insult, and you're like, "What?" You just go.
Yeah, that's why I reacted the way I did.
How dare you?
I'm an anarchist. I'm a fucking communist.
I'm a revolutionary socialist.
Everything else I understand, but this will not stand.
You can call me anything, but just don't call me a liberal.
Just don't call me a liberal. What was I saying? Oh, like so if you just point out like who they actually are and what they're doing, they don't have any retort, and it makes them really fucking angry because there's no basis for what they're doing except just pure racism, and they know it. They know it. And what was interesting online is that they were like acting like they didn't know they were being racist. And then when I saw like native posters, some from the info shop, some from Red Nation, and just other native people really pushing them and being like, no, you're being fucking racist. Here's why. Educating them, like what you were saying, Brandon, like really educating them about, the history of vigilante violence or Indian rolling or like border town economies or stuff like that. Their immediate impulse is to go violent on people online as they were trying to do in the streets and to intimidate. And so they only know the language of violence. And I am not interested in like bringing the language of violence to settlers. I'm interested in protecting our people. As Justine said, what the Red Nation does is we defend life. We defend the life of the earth. We defend the life of our people. We defend the life of oppressed people who are rising up, and we protect them. And that's like the function that we serve, which is an anti-fascist actually function of community self-defense. And those are the values that comes from. And so yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. The violence definitely translated from the streets into mostly Facebook where this was happening. And that some of us are getting personally targeted by these groups.
Right.
Yeah. And I always remember what you said, Nick, about what happened at, we were all up at Standing Rock, and everyone was saying this and that. And like one of the bigger arguments was that, there was enough of us to charge like the police. And I remember you had heard from a Lakota elder that, enough of us have died already. Like enough of us have died fighting, for our rights to live. And there's a different war that we could wage, the war of politics. Mm-hmm. And I always keep that in my mind because it is a language of violence that isn't even easily translatable, because I've literally been fighting Nazis in the streets since I was like 18 years old. And I really doubt those Nazis in the streets whose skulls I cracked learned anything from it at all. I really don't believe, like literally going into the black blocs and fighting literal Nazis in the streets. And that was part of my adolescence growing up. building my maturity towards this movement. And I don't, for as long as I've been doing this, and even people have been doing it way long before I have, it really hasn't solved anything. And that goes back to the importance of organizing, of actually building a movement. Like some of in white anarchism, there's this like large, there's a large weight put on building affinity groups, like building spontaneous groups who have a common goal to enact a tactic and then disperse or maintain that affinity. And I'm really against that. I'm really against building spontaneous affinity groups because it doesn't build to a larger political organizing goal. And that's one of the things about white anarchism probably won't ever agree with, was like how much weight is put on building spontaneous affinity groups, because we need to be politically organized. And Gallup is prime for that, as we were talking about earlier. 40%, 44% of the population is Native. And, as I've said and many others have said earlier, is that it's easily 90% or higher because of all the surrounding Native communities who go there to work, to shop, to, conduct Native affairs in Gallup. And it would be, I always wonder like what type of inspiration it would be, because I don't know, and I'm not sure if anyone else would know, if Native people politically took over Gallup. Like, what would that mean? What would that look like? And so that's one thing I'd like to put out there. Mm-hmm.
We're working on it.
That's the goal.
Yeah, we're working on it. Exactly. And we're working on it. And we need to have more involvement with the Native community in Gallup. And what you said was exactly right, Melanie, that these are people who it just takes so much effort for them just to show up and march. And like, how do we navigate that constant fear of...
They're really afraid.
They're really afraid because
they're scared because it's
they're
so
literally,
violent and so racist.
it's so violent. They're so economically impoverished.
Yep.
Like they're literally a paycheck away of living on the streets themselves. Yep. Because of the low standards of living that wage jobs provide in Gallup. The payday loans, the extortion of Native labor continues with debt. So for people who, like the radical police, the radical Olympics, who think that we weren't radical enough, have no idea of how fragile Native lives are there to begin with. And like you said, we're not there to enhance the fear there and to enhance the uncertainty. We have to provide certainty there. We have to provide a semblance of stability for people who are literally living on the edge all the time in Gallup. And it's not by us killing ourselves even more, like literally fighting the police. I don't see that as a way. It makes for great social media content, but at the end of the day, the state gets more funding, and more precious Native, Black, Indigenous lives are lost.
I think I heard recently, like on a socialist podcast, when capitalism is in decay, you're usually confronted with two options, like fascism or socialism. And we can question, what that means, or if that's the appropriate way to frame it. But definitely one of the alternatives or the options that's being presented to people living on the edge, the people living in precarity, which includes most Native people, is fascism. And we need to provide those of us who are anti-fascist, and across a different political spectrum, we need to be providing a different alternative. That's pure and simple. Except, fighting them in the street is one thing, right? But being able to show our people how much love we have for them. I love our people in Gallup. I know how difficult their lives are. I know how much fear they live in. I know the precarity of their lives. And that's why we got in our trucks, even though we were exhausted, and we drove 2.5 hours, on our own dime to go protect them and to take those young people home. Because we know I come from those families. Those are my people, literally my people, my kin. And so we, as people who are organizing, we need to be providing other alternatives. And I think that we have already been doing that with this mutual aid work. I mean, the Info Shop has done beautiful mutual aid work in Navajo Nation, throughout Navajo Nation. When we go out and we feed our unsheltered relatives, it's actually one of my favorite things that we do, because we show that love for our people.
And we feed everyone. No one is turned away.
Yep,
we
we feed
feed
everyone.
white people, we feed
We
black
do.
people, we feed
Native
they're
people.
all our relatives. Like, enough of this like BS about, oh, we only service this, we service everyone who's in need, because that's our base.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And so those mutual aid networks, I'm calling them like caretaking economies. The things that sprung up in the last few months organically because people actually care about each other. You have like folks decrying like, oh, if we defund police the world, we'll enter into chaos and anarchy. I mean, the thing about anarchy is that anarchy is actually about caretaking. And so, yes, it will enter into anarchy, but not like the stupid right-wing conception of what anarchy looks like, because anarchists are like some of the first people to step up to do mutual aid work in the failure of the state, in the shadow of the state. And so those of us who are part of like that tradition and that political spectrum, the caretaking we do for each other when we're able to abolish the police and create autonomous zones where we take care of each other and make sure no one is in need, that's the alternative that we provide on a daily basis, to our own communities, and that we have tried to do many times in Gallup, even though it's only, most of us live in Albuquerque, so we can't always do that work. But like, they exploit, they kill, they rape, they meaning all of these fucking settlers, including all these business owners and these cops in Gallup. We do the exact opposite of that. And I think the evidence of that was there was this young Dene woman. She said the most beautiful, fierce speech at that rally last Wednesday in Gallup. She was too scared to speak. She was too scared to read her speech. And she actually asked one of our comrades, Hope Sihasin from Red Nation, to stand up there with her and to help her read that speech, because our presence there gave her the strength to stand up and to speak her truth. And she would not have done that had we not been there, right? And so that's what we give our people. We give them the protection. We give them the hope, in this hellscape, hell world, the fucking hell world that they live in, that is a reservation border town. And that is what we should keep doing. Like, I don't give a fuck about Nazis or convincing a Nazi to not be a Nazi. Those Nazi fucks can go fucking die. I care about our people, and I care that everyday working class people aren't convinced by their fucking racist, white supremacist settler narrative. That's what I care about. And I think that's what we should be focusing on.
And just to kind of elaborate too, like, when I saw those photos, when I saw those videos, and when I saw the Facebook posts that were coming from these white business owners, they were literally calling this the Wild West.
Yep.
They were invoking this make-believe narrative that invasion is a form of self-defense, that white people came out here and tamed the wild frontier, tamed the Indians, had shootouts with Indians, because that's what they're invoking. When you say the Wild West, you're talking about genocide. And they understand implicitly that that's the foundation of their profit. They understand that that's where they're making this money, because white supremacy is conditioned by a violent gun culture in the United States that is tied to a system of heteropatriarchy and masculinity that is enshrined in the myth of the frontier, the conquest, right, of indigenous people, indigenous lives, indigenous bodies, indigenous lands, black lives, and black destinies and futures, right? And we understand that the gun, not democracy, was used to take indigenous land and used to put black people in chains, and to also enforce Jim Crow and the mass incarceration system that we have right now. This was how a so-called democratic society came into existence in this country at the end of a gun and a bayonet. And we have to reframe the questions and the answers that we're giving to people, right? That class, racial, and colonial structures cannot be reproduced without violence, period, in this country. So the fact that 46.2 million people filed for unemployment benefits, 35 million people have lost their health insurance, and meanwhile, there's been a mass transfer of social and capital, social wealth and capital upwards. U.S. billionaires saw their fortunes soar by $434 billion from March to May at the height of the pandemic, a 15% net worth increase. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg and Amazon's Jeff Bezos made the biggest gains. Bezos hauled in $34.6 billion, and Zuckerberg hauled in $25 billion. That's actually more. If you add those two together, that's like 5 times the CARES Act that tribes got. And tribes are setting up GoFundMe accounts to pay for some of these COVID related expenses. And we can even get a mild reform candidate like Bernie Sanders to offer socialized healthcare, right? But we can get an endless slew of policing and police institutions. It's easier to build a detention center on a reservation than it is to build a school or a hospital or even a grocery store. And we didn't see the same concern from the ruling class elite when 117,000 people died needlessly from a preventable disease, coronavirus, as we do with those who are concerned about quote unquote looting and property damage, right? Property has always had more sanctity than Indigenous and Black lives in this country. It's also worth pointing out that even with all of these so-called pre-existing conditions, which is, for us is white supremacy, settler colonialism, genocide, right? The pre-existing conditions that exist in Indigenous communities are things like quote unquote diabetes, which can be contact traced to the institutions of settler colonialism, and the fact that places like the Navajo Nation or Pueblo nations here in the Southwest are resource colonies for this settler nation. And the fact that most people in this country, not even just Black and Indigenous people, don't even own your own health to your body. You literally are paying rent because you have to pay a doctor, you have to pay a nurse just to get healthcare in this country. And this is the definition of authoritarianism. If you want to talk about, these quote unquote Antifa terrorists are coming in and they're trying to implement communist authoritarianism or whatever, capital is the most authoritarian system in the world. And because of its racist origins in this country, we understand it best, right? The white militias whose members are literal neo-Nazis in this state enact vigilante violence and authority where they see lawlessness and lack of authority. We are against the law as Indigenous people and as Black people because we uphold a different order. We uphold a different kind of law, right? We uphold a law that Melanie was just saying, and you were just saying, Justine and Brandon, of caretaking our relations, right? That is why we are illegal in this country, is because we care and we want to be human beings. And I think that is where this conversation has to go, is that we represent the alternative. We shouldn't be ashamed of what we represent. And we sure as hell are going to fight more than just Nazis in the street to get these things enacted, because we understand that it's a long-term political project that requires immense amount of organization and discipline. And I'll tell you what, we're only growing because people see the absurd hallucinatory response of these conspiracy-ridden neo-Nazi militias that are forming. That is not an alternative. The alternative that we're providing is one based on life and like actual relations of coexistence, not just with the land, not just with our own people, but with the land itself. And that's what scares them the most, right? For them, equality means oppression, right? And this is the double speak that they're kind of putting out there right now against Indigenous and Black people who simply want dignity.
Yeah. And that's ultimately what we're fighting for. We're fighting to live just dignified fucking lives. To have how many people in Navajo Nation don't even have clean water, running water? That's why the COVID hit as bad as it did, because we don't even have the basic necessities to create dignified lives. And these one thing that always pops in my head when we talk over and over about these races is just like, at the end of the day, all they are is stupid, lazy, and wrong. And that's why they react with violence, because they're fight or flight, and they're misogynist, so they're going to react with violence because they're afraid of us, because we offer an alternative to their settler reality hell world that they built for us, and they live in a fucking fantasy world. And that's like and you really touched on like a lot of the things that I tried to say to Gallup when I was there on the bullhorn. because that's ultimately why I'm a revolutionary socialist, right? Because it offers the pathway to begin to establish correct relations amongst one another. And because this settler hell world that we live in right now is completely backwards, completely 100%. I mean, that's what I mean. And we're living in our own apocalypse, and that's why I say, like, we have to out organize these people, and that's what the work of the Red Nation is: establishing these correct relationships amongst one another and caretaking for one another and really just loving one another. And how radical does something like that have to be? Like, how like deeply invested in this hell world are we, where caretaking is a radical idea? That is how backwards this society is. It is a
You
fucking
called a
hell
terrorist for
world.
doing caretaking work.
Exactly. It's fucking
You're compared to the
disgusting.
Taliban for doing caretaking work.
Literally. And it's because and that's why they're afraid of us, because we are willing to love and take care of each other. And when we're that strong, they are so fucking weak that they can't even do that for themselves and for each other. And they are completely threatened by the thing that we're trying to do.
Hey, Justine, do you want to wrap up the end of this podcast by reading our statement on solidarity with Black lives?
Yeah, all right. Solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Over 100 cities across the United States and 18 countries across the world are now engaged in active uprisings as a direct response to the rampant police violence that has terrorized our Black and African relatives for centuries. This magnitude of resistance in the so-called United States is stunning. The origin of police in the US is rooted in systemic racism, slavery, and land dispossession. Volunteer militias, composed of white settlers, hunted and captured enslaved Africans attempting to escape bondage. They slaughtered indigenous people to clear the land for more plantations. Their function has always been to wield violence in order to protect white capital and private property. They didn't even bother to change the famous star-shaped badge that early slave catchers and Indian killers were given. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was intended to. The sooner we come to terms with the fact that we live under a white supremacist capitalist colonial regime, the better we can educate our communities, agitate for our freedom, and liberate our people. On May 28th, thousands of people, especially youth of color, took to the streets of Albuquerque to protest the murder of George Floyd, as well as the many other Black and colonized people murdered by the state. The police responded by brutalizing people in their own neighborhoods. That evening, protesters attempted to rescue and protect three young Black men being harassed and arrested by a notoriously violent Albuquerque Police Department a few blocks away from the protests. The APD, Albuquerque Police Department, APD, retaliated by arresting a prominent Black activist in the city, Clifton White, who helped organize the May 28th action. As of this writing, White is still in APD custody as a political prisoner despite widespread demands for his release. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, the people are liberating territory and redistributing resources from corporate megastores. The food taken from these stores is being used to feed the community that consists of mostly poor and working class Black, Brown, Indigenous, and migrant families. And in Seattle, people have reclaimed an abandoned police precinct as the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, a self-governed commune within the city functioning without police. This is exactly what communism and decolonization looks like. In the absence of corrosion, people reclaim their humanity and care for each other, ensuring no one is in need. In absence of colonialism and racism, people self-organize around values of compassion and abundance rather than competition and greed. We have already seen this with the widespread voluntary mutual aid networks that arose organically in response to community need and state failure during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is clear that we do not need the police, we only need each other. Now is the time to come together, fight and resist the oppressor. Minneapolis is the birthplace of the American Indian movement, which formed in response to police violence against Native American communities in the city. The history of Black and Indigenous resistance in Minneapolis demonstrates that our history of resistance and solidarity are deep. Native resistance movements have always been inspired by African liberation struggles, and we continue to use theories and praxis that Black revolutionaries have developed over the course of generations. We pledge to combat the anti-Black racism that runs deep in Native families, communities, and nations. We pledge to use whatever resources we have as the Red Nation to elevate the voices and struggles of our Black and African relatives. We acknowledge and embrace our Black Indigenous relatives wherever they are. We pledge to advance the long histories of shared struggle between Black and Indigenous people in all our work. We encourage people to build upon the dreams and histories of liberation that Black and Indigenous people share, rather than compete for resources or recognition of our trauma by the state. Finally, whatever harm we may have caused to one another, we encourage Black and Indigenous people to come together in this moment to fight for unity so we can bring this beast down once and for all. In the Red Nation, we say, when the people move, we move. And as we hold the anger and grief in our hearts for the way police kill our relatives with impunity, our hearts are also full of gratitude and joy for seeing the people refuse to allow this violent settler state to kill and oppress us any longer. We give our unwavering and unconditional support to these uprisings, and we are committed to protecting and defending our Black and African relatives. We will be there in solidarity with our Black and African relatives as they resist and demand justice. Decolonization is the main political frameworks that influences our revolutionary work. We draw from radical Black and Indigenous feminists who see decolonization as an abolitionist project that requires the end of all forms of carcerality, including caging of land, water, and human life within the false confines of property, borders, prisons, and commodities. We join generation of Black and Indigenous communists who have sought and fought to replace carceral regimes with relations of caretaking. We seek to build geographies of freedom for all life in the ashes of empire. With this much people power growing on the ground while this violent empire is in shambles, we have never been closer in our lifetime to bringing it to its knees. What we do here affects the lives of billions who live under the boot of U.S. imperialism. Defunding the police here gets us one step closer to ending the U.S. occupation everywhere. We, the people, are taking back our power. It has never been more abundantly clear that revolution is necessary. Justice for George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, defund the police. May our hearts remain strong. The Red Nation.
My people come from the land. My people come from the land. My people come from the land on which you stand. Still fighting the white man. Still fighting the white man. The path of the arrows narrow. My people living in peril with several blows. I'm armed wrestling with white devils, disheveled but never settled. You settlers ain't on my level. Give me bass, give me treble. I'm trouble but never tremble. Rekindle the seven council fires. Keepers of the flame. Light up the burning fire. It's even in my name. I'm a symbol. See jungle is how I rumble. I may stumble but me you got the Kishi I never crumble. They don't feel the land, they kill the land. Try to kill the Indian and save the man. Send the slaughter, they poison water from Flint, Michigan to Standing Rock. The land is high, the land is hurt. I feel it too, I'm from the earth. My flesh and blood, the color of the dirt. I'm blessed enough to love my mother first. Talking Mother Earth, Unshimaha, Lakota, Makosha, Washaga, give me strength. Hair like the land and they grow at length. Well, peace, yeah, they could. Our grandparents brave. Took them to that boarding school where our grandparents stayed. Cut them off from the ways that their grandparents prayed. They're trying to build these pipelines over my grandparents' grave. There ain't no stopping this red light from blinding us. Ain't no stopping these problems from finding us. It's like I run with nowhere to go. My nation is a rosebud with nowhere to grow. My people come from the land.